Today, we'll take you through an end-to-end journey for accounting firms. We'll show you how the Pryme Accounting Package helps streamline operations across the full matter lifecycle.
So let's jump right into it. Today we'll look at a process where we start by looking at a new client coming in. We will look at setting up a new matter, planning for that matter, budgeting for that matter. Then we will start working with that matter, tracking some time and potentially other costs that we want to pass on to the client. And in the end, we will look at the invoicing process. Let's start off with a new potential client. Now, in some cases, there might be a requirement to ensure compliance. That most often means a KYC process. With Pryme Matters, we have a new kind of document called a compliance assessment. The compliance assessment is meant to be a permanent record of the assessments created on different clients. That could be actual clients that we have where we do a recurring check, or it could be for new clients. And there are two parts of it. One is a conflict of interest check that is mostly applicable if there is any kind of legal advice involved. So we'll skip over that for today. But there's also a KYC part where you can designate what is the status if you have checked all the different parts that you need to check, such as anti-money laundering, people of influence, sanction list, etc., etc. And that we capture in the Know Your Client part down here where you will put in the information. I'll not do it for real because I don't have a real client to check. In some cases, we also connect this up with an external check for KYC. Then we will automate the process, get the status back, and in the end, that will give us a status of usually either approved or rejected. And there could be some comments as well and a link to that assessment outside. What is important here is that we internally keep a record of all the assessments that we have done, and these cannot be changed. So as soon as I close my assessment, I cannot delete this, I cannot modify it. It is a part of the permanent record. So we are compliant with the record keeping that we did all our checks of our clients. So let's assume that we now have a client that we can work with, and we want to create a new matter for that client. There are multiple ways of doing this. We could create a new matter if it is a new client. We could also roll over existing matters. So if you have a year-over-year process where you're saying some of these matters needs to be rolled over, we do a matter for a year and then we close it down. Then we could use something like the batch copy matters where you select to take your matters and roll them over. In that case, you can decide to either keep them empty from a financial perspective, but you could also say, I would like to take the previous budget, copy that over, or actually take the actuals from last year and make that the budget. So you might have budgeted for 50 hours last year, but in actual fact, you spent 60 hours. Maybe it makes more sense to say, well, now 60 hours is the actual budget for this new year. And then we can negotiate based on that. And you can also decide if you want to keep the original prices or a new price list should apply. For this example, I will create a new matter directly, not rolling over an existing, and I will call this matter demo 1. I'll use a template, and we would usually have different templates for different kinds of matters. The template includes a base setup with all the financial rules, the rules about budgeting and who is in charge, and also a structure of how we can track the time. In this case, I will select our generic small template. I will select a client from my list of clients, and I'll designate who is responsible for this matter. In this case, I will set this as Prakash. That happens to be the user I'm currently logged in and acting on behalf of. And so with that, I get my new matter created and I can start planning it out in more detail. Here I have my matter structure. I have a very simple structure with general time, non-chargeable time, recurring services, and outlays and disbursements. And my different templates, of course, have different structures. Some might be with specific lines for different kinds of services, such as payroll or financial advice or audits or year-end closing. Within the matter, I can also add additional information. I can add in different deadlines that we need to keep to. This is not to be confused with the actual planning of work, but there could be some high-level deadlines that we have agreed with the client that we need to keep for specific things. There will also be invoicing instructions. In this case, the client has a specific instruction that has been there for a long time. We can see this is back to 23, that there is a spend limit of 100,000 per month on this. So we need to be aware of that. And that could be multiple instructions. These will follow through, and they can be either on a client basis if they are for the client, or they could be on a matter by matter basis if they're matter specific instructions. I can also define a matter team who will be working with this. If there are dedicated people in this, there could be different partners or directors or different roles in this. I can set those up as matter team members. With this, I am ready to start planning out my matter. Now, this is optional, but you can, of course, and I mentioned that before, have a budget on a matter. The budget could either be rolled over from a previous matter, it could be copied from another matter. We have a lot of budgeting features where you can move things around and reuse them. In this case, I will create a simple budget saying we need some, in this case, associates working on this matter. And I will put in a budget in hours for the year of 2026. We need 50 hours of time for this matter. And we could, of course, do this over a longer timeline. It could be year by year, but it could also be month by month or quarter by quarter if you want a more detailed budget to show up. With this budget, I put it in this case as a quantity, but it is also tracked as an expected internal cost and an expected price to the client. In this case, we are working with a time and materials based case, but it could of course be more of a fixed priced engagement as well. But this gives us the numbers, and we have all of them together. So we can now see that we have expected cost on this project, our internal standard rate for an associate, and this would be the rate that we would bill it out for the entirety of this matter. And we can use this to track how far we are and if we are keeping within the budget. This is the budgeting phase. From here, we can create more specific planning. And we have what we call a work item. The work item is a piece of work that we create for a matter for someone to do. I can either do them from in here. I could look at my work items and I can look at those in a Kanban view or a calendar view. Let's take the Kanban view. And here currently I have nothing planned, of course, on this new matter. But I could create something new. I could say, well, we want something new for this new matter. It should be something where I'm reusing a standard setup. I could, of course, create something entirely new that is to be done, but I could also use a template. I here have some different templates. That could be a KYC check. Maybe we need to do that every so often. It could also be something like payroll. And let's take that as an example. So I apply this template. And I say, well, this is for Prakash to do. And we would start working on this maybe on January 1st. If we're starting this year, maybe it's a little late in the year to actually start working on it, but we need to be done by the 10th of January for this first one. So let's say we're setting this up for starting at the start of the year. And then we can set up recurrences because we would do this recurringly month after month. Now, this actually came with a standard setup for when this should be done and how often. In this case, I will actually start over just to show you what it looks like. So if we start with a clean setup, I can go in here and say we want to have a monthly recurring thing. We do it starting at the beginning of the month. We want actually this to go on until the end of December because it should be throughout the year. And so I get a number of recurrences created for this, and I can see that I now have for February, March, and April, and May, and so on and so forth, and they are all created in here. And so now they are assigned, and I have my work assigned for the future. In this case, I actually assigned who would do it for the rest of the year. I didn't have to, and then I could assign it as we go and decide who does it for each specific instance. I can also decide where this is posted to, what kind of task, of course, and then we have the status of this hasn't been started because I just created it. Each work item also comes with a checklist of things to do, and so as you do the different parts of the work, you would mark these off and say this is done, this is done, this is done, etc. And at some point, the whole work item is done. I can also mark the whole work item as done. If I say now this is completed, and then it will warn me and say, well, you didn't finish all the items on your checklist. Are you sure you still want to mark the whole thing as completed? In this case, I might say yes. And so this goes off the list and it is now marked as being completed. And so I would go on with additional different work. So I can now see what I have. I have a number of things in my overdue column because I created a number of tasks in the past. So February and March, we're now in June. They are, of course, highly overdue to be done. I also have some that are for later, July and August and September, October, and I don't have any that are current for this period of time I'm currently in. So this is for work planning. And of course, I can move things around. If something is to be done earlier, maybe I could say, well, I should start on July a little early, so I should start next week. Then I just move it to June the next week. And then that changes the date. I can also look at this at a higher level, not just one matter, but across the different matters. I can see who is working on what in different projects or for different customers. So if I switch over and say we would like to see different clients, what have we in store for a datum corporation? This is, in this case, a timeline, but we could also look at it for what stage are the things in. Are they to do? Are they in progress? Are they done? So it's a different reality. Or I could look at this by who is this assigned to? What does Cassie have to do? What do David have? What does Prakash have? And of course, I can reassign work. I could say, well, this KYC check that David is supposed to be doing is highly overdue. I will move it over to Cassie. And so that switches the load. In this case, it tells me that it could not send an email to Cassie. It will try to send emails notifying Cassie that now you have more work to do. But Cassie is not a real person, so I cannot send an email to her. This is the whole planning experience, and you can move things around. If something was, let's say, this was in progress and say, yeah, now we're moving it to review, I simply drag it over to review. So you move things around and manage the work in here. You can also look at this from a timeline perspective. So just as we looked at it from a Kanban perspective, I could look at the work calendar. And here I get a timeline of who is supposed to be doing what on what day. And again, I can move things around. So we can see here we have this payroll for June. And maybe I want to move this out a little later to start at a later point and move things around. I can also look at this in a more timeline view and group this by assigned to, and I can see if there's overlap. Now, in my small company, that's not that much to do, but I can work with this planning and say, well, we actually should start a little bit earlier on this, a little bit later. This is a part of planning work with work items. Now that we have planned for a matter and the work, we are kind of ready to go starting on it. But maybe there's one more thing. Maybe we have some recurring services that we should also set up. So in our matter, we created a task here for recurring services. But how do we put a recurring service on a matter like this? We would do that with what we call a subscription order. I will create a new subscription order for this client and say we want a recurring service, and we would invoice from the 1st of June, in this case until, let's say, the end of the year. There it ends. It doesn't have to be an end. Hopefully there is no end, but there could be an end to it. And I'll assign it to our project and put it onto the recurring services. I can also decide if this is to be billed in advance or in arrears. In this case, I'll bill it in advance. I'll put in a line for a service. I have different service items. I have one here aptly called service fee, but this could be a license fee for a piece of software or any other kind of service. And I would like to have one of these. Then we get a price from the price list. We can override this manually, and then it will do recurring billing on this. What I haven't set up here is how often it will be. I'll create a rule for that saying this should be every 1 month, but I could also do something for quarterly, saying it's every 1 quarter or every 3 months or yearly, etc. In this case, I'll take them monthly. This is our subscription order. When we're satisfied with that, we simply release it. With this being released, it is ready to go. I will have a list of all the subscriptions that are ongoing, and I simply go in on a recurring basis, and it could be set up scheduled to make sure that anything that haven't been posted is then posted. I can decide at that point if this should be a separate invoice or this should come with the next invoice with other services as well. This is what I would do at this point in time. So it simply goes through and it then creates entries that will go on to the next invoice. We can see in this case, it created one entry that will be on the next invoice saying service fee for June of 2026. And we'll come back to this one later when we get to invoicing. But now it's on there and it is ready for the invoice to pick up. Let's move over to tracking time. This is, of course, an important part of any business where time is money, and we have different ways of tracking time in here. If I was a fee earner that was mostly tracking my time, I would have a much more simplified role center that I could go into, but most of my day-to-day time tracking would not necessarily be done inside of Business Central. If I hide this, so you can see a little bit more, I can pull up my time tracker. And I have an ongoing time tracker in here where I track all the things that I have done throughout the day. Now, I should have started tracking time on this meeting, so I'll do that immediately and say we have a presentation. This is what I'm working on currently. And then on that, I can decide what customer this was for. This was for a Datum Corporation. It was for the Demo 1 project, and it automatically selects the general task because that is preset up on my matter to be selected. And that's all I need to do. I'm now tracking time on this. So I have all these time trackings throughout the day. I started and stopped. And of course, I could go back to a task that I worked on earlier and resume work on that, and I'll add additional time onto it. I will get back into Business Central. In here, what we will see is a time tracking calendar, which is showing all the time that I have tracked so far in this week. These are all my trackings. And we can also see the presentation that I just started is showing in here red because it is still ongoing. Now, I should have started this 15 minutes earlier, so I can simply go ahead and drag it to start a little bit earlier. In this case, that also stops it because now I'm modifying it, but I could actually go in and restart it again, and then it will keep on going as something that I'm currently tracking on. We also see in here that this is where I already selected the project, demo, and general. I can also create manual trackings. If I did something early in the day, I could go in and say, well, I did something. Then again, I select my matter, my client, etc. But if I was working on a work item, I would just select the work item. And maybe this is the point where I was working on this payroll for May that is highly overdue. So I just select that. By selecting the work item, I automatically get the client, the matter, and the task filled in. So I don't need to remember what the codes are for that. It's just one selection. Now I have this on my time here. This creates the basis for my timesheet. Of course, there are other ways of tracking time. You could also track time within Outlook. So if you open up Outlook, you can select an email. You can say track time on that. You can track time on meetings. And that you can actually do from here in as well. Let's zoom in a little bit and look at a specific day today. And I can show my calendar. Now I can see all the things I have in my calendar as reference, and I can add those in. I have some time set aside for focus time. I could add that in as something I want to track. Maybe I change the description to what I did, and I might again select a work item. Let's say we select it now again. More work on this May payroll that I'm way behind on. And now that is in my time tracking, but it's based on what I have in my calendar. Similarly, if I'm using Teams to call people, I could show my Teams calls, and they show up in here with the actual time the call took. And we can see a lot of the time I tracked was based on those Teams calls. I simply click that plus button to pull that over in, and then it ends up on my timesheet. It's very easy to reference what I did and when. Now, if there are any gaps in my time, I could also ask my Copilot to help me fill in those gaps. Here, for instance, I have some gaps in my day. Maybe there's something I forgot. Maybe there are emails that I sent or received that should be the basis for some time entries. And there I can use the Copilot for complete my timesheet. It goes to the Microsoft Graph. It asks for all the emails I sent, all the emails I received, all what I did in my calendar. In this case, it picked up that I had planned a preschool pickup in the afternoon. Well, that's true. That was a good suggestion, but I don't want to put that on my timesheet, so I will discard it. Sometimes it gets good suggestions. Sometimes there is nothing to suggest. It will not just try to invent something. There must be some substance behind it. But there could be emails early in the morning or the afternoon or in any of these gaps where it says, well, you probably did something. You should put that on the timesheet, and it will put it in. With that, I kind of have my week. I know it's a half week at this point. And then I can simply update my timesheet based on this. With that, I now have a timesheet. I can submit my time. Now, if I don't remember to submit my time, we will send out emails reminding people to send in their timesheets. And that could look something like this. You get an email, and the important part is you get everything you have on your timesheet so you can verify if this is actually a complete timesheet. In this case, it's definitely not a complete timesheet, but if it was, you could just click Submit Now. If you want to go in, review and adjust, you click the link in the mail. So there's no excuse for not submitting your timesheet. After that email, if you still don't submit your timesheet at some point in time, we will send out an email to the manager escalating through the levels saying someone haven't submitted their timesheets. Please let them know. And of course, the process goes on until everything is submitted. Let's say I was reminded of this, I should submit my timesheet, and this would open up my timesheet in here. I can see all the entries. This is the same what we saw in the calendar. I can view this in different ways. I could view this as line, as I could also view it as a matrix so I can see how much time it is per day and even get a graphical representation of where my gaps are. I can see I'm not really working full time at the moment, so I need again to find some more time. Here, you don't have to actually track the time with a start and end. You can also go in and say, yep, I worked on this for 4 hours and just put that in as an entry. That is also a possibility. You can allow this more simple time tracking, and for administrative tasks, maybe that is good enough. Maybe you don't need the details. Something we will see here when we look at the time entries that were created is these have nice round numbers, even though the track time is something else. And that's because we are applying rounding rules to this. Now I'm doing 6-minute increments, but you could have any kind of setting where you're saying we're rounding up, we're rounding down, we're rounding to the nearest, so you get nice time entries out of it. You can also see that for these, we have not only the small text field here, but if you want to write more, we have a really big text field so you can have a long narrative of the work performed. For invoicing purposes, that might be interesting. You can either write this manually or you can use a preset standard text. I have one here for an agreement where it fills in a boilerplate. I need to fill in what I actually did. I know this is too simple, but bear with me. Of course, we could also use, again, AI to help with some of these, where it says webinar prep. Maybe I can improve that description. I can do that for a single text. I could also do multiple. Let's do a couple of them and see if it can improve those descriptions to something more meaningful. Now, there wasn't much to go on, but sometimes you get something better out of it. Here it said instead of webinar preparation, prepared and organized materials and agenda, etc., etc. I mean, that is a guess by AI, but it definitely looks more professional than just 2 words. It can help some people. And of course, it will also help with spelling and grammar if you actually have a good description. I can submit my timesheet. And after this is submitted, there could be an approval process. In this case, I have not set up an approval process. I'm running a one-man shop, but there could be an approval by a manager, either the matter responsible, or it could be more in the organization that it is my manager who approves the time, or of course, both of them, or even a third person. We can have up to 3 levels of approval. But in this case, it was tracked directly. And then I can see on my matter that we should now have some time. No, that was actually not the time. That was the services. Here we have another project where I've tracked some time. We can see that we actually tracked more than we had budgeted for. So we are going over budget. In addition to time tracking, we could also track expenses. So we do have expense sheets where you can track your different expenses that you have, any outlays or disbursements. Here I had dinner with Mr. Brown. I tracked that and put it in. I should also attach a receipt. That's why I haven't sent it in. But attaching the receipt, then I can send it in. And then there can be rules whether this is reimbursed or depending on how this was paid. In the end, I now have tracked some time. I have some recurring services that we can invoice for. And it's time to look at invoicing. And for that, I will open up my matters to invoice. In my matters to invoice, I can see all the different matters where there's something I can invoice. I get the information about what is the matter, the description, the client. I see who's responsible for the matter. I also see who's responsible for invoicing. And that could be someone else. In the case down here, I have a matter where Connie is responsible for the matter, but Cassie is actually responsible for invoicing. So we separate those roles. I also get some extra information about the amount of time and the amount of expense. And in this case, we can see on this matter, there's half an hour in open timesheets. So maybe something wasn't really approved. Maybe we should hold off with invoicing. I can look at the details and see why that is. Of course, I can also see previous invoices. What did we invoice last time? So I have that as a reference. Then I have, in this case, already created the document. So I can see a link to the document created, the invoice, and even a draft of that as a PDF. So I can open this up immediately and investigate if this looks good. So we can see here, well, does it look good? Yeah, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I have that immediately. I don't need to go anywhere else. So I, of course, started the process for some of these matters already. We could look at the matter we created down here. I can see I have 123 to be invoiced. Opening this up, we can see that this was one entry, service fee for June 2026. That looks good. There's nothing to change, but I could set this on hold, making it not approved. I could also make some changes to it before I raise the invoice. But otherwise, I'm happy with this. And this is also where I could designate someone as responsible for invoicing, so it shows up on their list of matters to invoice. And they would then set a status. Maybe this is ready to create an invoice, and they would set this status, create invoice, so they know that this is ready. Maybe somebody else needs to review it. And so when I have a number of different matters as I go, I can simply click these off and say, yeah, I would like to create an invoice for this, and we should also create an invoice for maybe this as well. It simply starts that process in the background. I don't have to wait for anything or look at it. Now I'm creating the invoice, waiting. No, I'm just saying do it. And the system does it in the background. So later on, I can come back and these will have been created. And I can look these up and say what is on this invoice. In this case, I can open up the invoice. I can see that on this one, we have work per enclosed specification, 1.39 hours to the value of 120. And this is an aggregate line. This could be multiple entries behind this that are showing up in here. If I'm happy with this, then of course I will send it for review or approval to whoever needs to review or approve it. If I send it out here for review, there could be a standard setup. I now got an email. In this email, I will see that there is again a draft PDF with all the details. In here, I can review this, and I can also see some of the key numbers in here and see if this is okay. Then I can click either approve now or reject or review and adjust. In this case, I would maybe say approve now, but let's just take review and adjust to see what happens. It opens up Business Central. Now I had it open already, but that person wouldn't have that. And they see again the full information about the invoice. But this is in a slimmed down screen without so many details as there would be normally. They see less. But what they do see is what we did not include on this invoice. There were some things that were not included. Why weren't these lines included? Maybe there's a good reason, maybe not. But that was the decision made. And so they could say, well, actually, these should be on it. So I will reject it. And so they can reject it. They could also go in and look at the details and see what were included on this. It was these lines. And this is something you need to decide on. Can they go in and change the descriptions and say this was not meeting with Sue, it was meeting with John in this case. So you can make changes to the text, etc. That is allowed. You could also allow them to change quantities and prices if you wanted to. Again, setup depending. But maybe this can only be charged out at 100 per hour. And so, of course, that changes the total for this invoice. So you can make those changes specifically. But we try to make it easy to do that review and adjust. And you can decide if you want to allow changes during the review process. There is also a process to adjust prices across all the entries. We call that adjust prices prorated, where you can say, I would like this invoice to come out to 150. And so it says, well, that means we'd need to do a price adjustment of minus 9.2%. And now it will add up to this automatically. In the end, I will approve this review, and then I can close this down, and we get back to the view where this is now an invoice that can be posted. If we look at the last matter we created, where we had a service fee on, if we create an invoice for this, here we can see that we have service fee for June 2026 coming out here. And this could be with other services as well. So this is a general process end to end. We start with a matter, we budget for it, we plan the work, we track the time, we track the expenses, and we invoice for it in the end. And of course, there could also be additional process at the end. If there's something we cannot invoice for, we will go into processing all that unbilled. So I would open up a WIP and Revenue Recognition page where I can see all the different projects and what we have that we haven't been able to invoice for. Then I can post that to a WIP account to account for it. And for that, especially if you have things that are not really invoiced and it's sitting around for a long time, you can set up rules for aging of this, saying if there are entries that are more than 2 months old, we only value them at 90%, more than 480, etc. And you can do that for different categories with different rules for different kinds of matters as well. So you can get the correct valuation of all that unbilled work that is sitting around and you cannot charge out.